friends! Welcome back to Stage Right. I'm your host, Sierra Haynes. My goal is to bring you along on a journey inside the minds and lives of some of Canada's most exciting playwrights. I've picked 5 playwrights that I'm curious to speak with, and then those playwrights will get to pick other writers that they want to get curious with. Whatever you're doing, we've got a story for you. This is Stage Right. On this episode of Stage Right, my guest, originally from Ontario, played a very important role at our theatre, the Globe Theatre. He was the first playwright in residence in Western Canada and held the position from 1975 to 1990. He wrote shows for young audiences that toured our province, as well as he wrote plays for the adult audiences that flocked to the Globe Theatre's unique and intimate in-the-round experience. Additionally, he combined his love for playwriting with theological studies, and he holds a master's degree in theatre and theology. My guest is Rex Deverell. I love history, and I love that this podcast has given me the chance to dig into my own theater's past. I came up through the Globe Theatre School here in Regina. It's the place that taught me how to create and put on a show. Speaking with Rex, I could really see how the Globe Theatre has always been a center that fostered new and devised work, and that the theatre has always valued the potential its young artists and young audiences possess. With Rex, we discuss his shows Super Wheel and The Boiler Room Suite, and the Boiler Room Suite's second life as an opera. I'll chat with you on the other side of this sound break. All right, thank you so much, Rex Deverell, for sitting down with me this afternoon. I've been looking forward to this conversation for so long.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
So we had some goofy communication issues, and now we've made it, and we're going to settle into this great conversation all about playwriting and Saskatchewan and the Globe Theatre, and it's just so fantastic to have you. You're such an important part of our legacy at the Globe, so I feel very honored to chat with you this afternoon.
Thank you for asking.
So I read that you have the longest run as a playwright in residence, and you were the first playwright in residence in Western Canada at the Globe.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that's so cool.
Saskatchewan is way ahead of everybody else.
We did have a track record for that. So you were the Globe's playwright in residence from 1975 to 1990, and do you mind just sharing with us how you ended up at the Globe? Because you're from Ontario.
Well, my wife, Rita Deverell, accounted herself an actor, auditioned for Ken and Sue Kramer at the Globe way back, and put me in the trunk of the car and went out to Regina so that she could be in the school company, the touring schools all year. That's how I ended up at the Globe. They heard that I had been a minister, a pastor for 3 years. They didn't quite know what to expect. Well, when I left the Globe finally, for a long time, when I got back to Ontario, I thought, whenever anybody asked me about that, I said, yeah, I'm in Ontario, and I grew up here as much as I grew up. But I'm really, I've been in Saskatchewan for the last umpteen years, and it feels like that's where home is, Mm-hmm. So I didn't know where I lived for a while because I was so set in Saskatchewan. And, I really felt that all my loyalties were to Saskatchewan because I really felt my identity was had become a Saskatchewan storyteller. Mm.
What do you remember most fondly about being growing into being a Saskatchewan storyteller?
Well, it was odd when I got to Regina from Ontario because my wife, they said, well, you claim to be a playwright, write us a play.
Wow, just like that, huh?
So pretty close. And I wrote them a play that was too cute for words. It was called Niddle Pickle and the Adventures of the Ticky Plum Soup.
Okay.
Yeah, you see how cute it was.
It sounds very cute, yeah. That sounds adorable, actually.
It was about a talking duck. Anyway.
What's better than a talking duck?
Yeah, who could perform magic tricks. So they said, thank you. I wonder if you could write us another play. Because, the Globe Theatre is a very serious theatre. And
yes. We're very serious.
And this is how I got to start to tell the stories of Saskatchewan. I went out to see a performance that the play that Rita was in. It was a Brian Way play about a magician who couldn't get his hat off, and the audience had to perform various transformations in order to. Anyway, and so I was driving through this little town. I've forgotten now which one it was. It was a one grain elevator town, and
there's a lot of them.
There was tumbleweeds were tumbling down the streets, and
yes.
And I went into the hotel and there was nobody around, so I couldn't ask where the school was. So I kept driving the 4 or 5 blocks that the town consisted of, and found the school, and walked in, and there was this wonderful laughter coming from the gymnasium. So I peeked around and I saw these actors standing in the middle of these children, in their costumes, and it was wonderful. It kind of sent shivers down. Then I walked outside and I looked up at the big sky and the silhouette of the grain elevator and the little town, and I said to myself, but this is drama too. So I wrote a play for children about a little town that had been taken off the map. The town's name was Short Shrift, and that was the children's play, the school tour play that the Globe Theatre did the next year.
Okay.
We stayed.
Yeah, you stayed. It's so interesting because that's sort of relative to my family history too. My grandfather was from Barbados, and then he went to England to be a nurse, and on a trip. He took across Canada on the train. He came through Saskatchewan and got off and never got back on. Just loved what it looked like here. So
Isn't that interesting? My mother was a Barbadian.
Oh, really?
Yes, true story.
There you go. There we got that in common a bit. I like that. Yeah, so I understand the feeling of seeing the prairies, and certainly I've grown up here. So I'm in love with what our landscape looks like, and the idea of wanting to stay and learn about it and live inside of this beautiful place. So yeah.
And of course, it helped that the Globe Theatre, that Ken and Sue Kramer kept asking me to write plays, and finally to write a play for the main stage for the adult season. Yeah.
Which was
Boiler Room Suite.
Yes, we're going to definitely talk about that one. I've got a big, long list of things.
Okay.
Yeah, that play is so interesting. For me, the biggest reveal or the most surprising thing is there's so much built up about what the people upstairs the fancy people upstairs are up to in their life. And then once Aggie and Sprague actually make it upstairs, it's more abandoned, whereas downstairs might have even been more fantastic because of the world they created for themselves. What was your inspiration to go there and do that?
Oh my. I would like to say, and I'm not sure that this is the case, that after creating this imaginary revolution down there in the boiler room suite, when they actually decided, when it brought them to the point of saying, we've got to do something, we've got to change, we can't just sit here drinking away. Well, partly maybe this was false courage, but anyway, they went upstairs and discovered that the hotel was no longer what they thought it might be. They thought it was occupied. They thought there would be really wonderful banquets being served in the dining room. They could imagine all these powerful, rich people up in the rooms, and there was nothing. It wasn't as they imagined. And so they had to come face to face with each other as they actually were. And with the janitor as he actually was.
And in some ways, the janitor, although I have a quote. He says, I think you owe me something, or I owe you something, or something. And it's all about the relationships that people have. And in a way, I thought that the janitor was the most lonely. Pete was the most lonely character in the whole show, because he felt that he had his life more together than Aggie and Sprug, when in fact he didn't have a family. He didn't have anyone to create this world with, these imaginations with.
He was isolated in a way that they weren't. Pete doesn't seem to have any history. I pictured him as a kind of 60s, 50s bigot sort of person. But he's out on his own ledge, isn't he? And when he actually decides that he is going to sweep these two vagrants out of the boiler room, he doesn't like himself, I think, in that moment. And that he regrets the kind of violence that he has driven himself to.
Yeah, I think I have the quote. It says, I'm sorry I did that. I didn't know why I blew up like that. Maybe I see you people are kind of dangerous or something, like you're human, but you've gone rotten. I figured I might get infected.
Right. When I was finishing my theology degree at McMaster, and about to go to New York to study theater and theology at Union Theological Seminary, that summer I had about 3 jobs so that I could get enough money to do all of this stuff. And one of the jobs was working in a halfway house for alcoholics in Hamilton. And indeed, some of the images that are in the play come out of that experience, including the volunteer supervisor of the place, who actually was really pictured himself fighting a battle with the alcoholism of the people in the residence.
This character is Mr. Pilkington?
Well, he was a combination of Pilkington and Pete. For instance, he's one of his attitudes about alcoholism was that it's like banging a nail into a board, and if the nail bends, no matter how much you try to straighten it out, the nail still bends. And for me, I'm not saying that I'm much more enlightened, but I am saying that at that time, and I still would disagree with him, or that you just accept people. They haven't become inhuman just because they have an illness,
yes.
right? Or an addiction. They still are human beings, and that you can have a relationship and a respect for them. You have to value them, regardless of whatever problems, and we all have them.
Yeah, yeah.
We all have our weaknesses. Yeah. So I think that experience went into my writing the character of Pete, that he engaged in a battle with what he thought was a depraved, if you like, couple of human beings.
Right.
And when he actually expressed that and kicked them out of their accommodation, as if you could call it accommodation, the boiler room of an old abandoned hotel.
It's so interesting to me that he's so set on this goal, especially when we find out that upstairs has got nothing going on.
Right.
Who's he doing this for?
Well, somebody's paying him to keep the place going. Even because for sure, if the heat is turned off, the possibility that the hotel will deteriorate faster is for sure. And he expresses that, I think. You got to keep the heat on. You got to keep the place warm. What if he really didn't have a job?
That's what I was kind of wondering.
What if he was just doing this?
That's where my mind was going after thinking about it. I read it and I was like, wait, but like, why is he even bothering?
It's
There's nothing happening at this place.
He's got his pension, right? And he has to feel useful. And he has to have an area of authority. So he goes down to the boiler room and keeps it going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think I thought of that at the time, but who knows?
Okay. Yeah, fresh perspective coming in.
Right. Yeah, there's always more interesting stuff to emerge from this. Isn't it a mystical thing?
I know.
Writing, you don't know quite where it's come from, although you can think of examples of things that you've experienced, but you don't know how it's all coming together like that. And then you look at what you've written several years later and you say, oh, maybe that could be.
Yeah. Well, I think that's also part of the magic of like having your work interpreted by actors and directors on stage after, right?
True. Sometimes you go on and they do something that you wouldn't have thought of in a million years, and it's better than the thing that you wrote. I think it was T.S. Eliot said that his plays, the further away from his, writing them, the further away they got, they became more odd, different to him, and different than the play that he wrote. And
right.
He said generously, and usually better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found that. I mean, obviously, I'm still an emerging artist in general, but whenever I've given my writing over to someone else to interpret, it's the imagination and collaboration that comes from or comes out of that act.
Yeah,
is always so enlightening.
Yeah,
because it's always something I didn't expect.
Yeah, and sometimes it goes off the rails.
Sometimes down, and you gotta rein it back in. Yeah, for sure.
Where did you get that idea?
Totally. Then you go, I think I need to do a rewrite on this pass because this is not what I want.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness. So kind of coming back into this show, there's this part that also interested me. The self-awareness that Ager and Sprague have about their situation despite their imagination or imaginative delusions. So I wrote this little comment down, this piece. They're playing, and Sprague is speaking to Ager as a character. Now, I've offered to cure you, Ager. We've offered to send you to a rehabilitation center where you could get yourself dried out and return as a more responsible member of society. Then, perhaps, we could consider giving you a certain amount of social assistance until you find your feet again. We've made that offer to you many times, Ager, many times. We don't owe you a living, Ager. But that offer, that very generous offer, is still open. And then she goes on to call their social assistance filthy, which I think is interesting. And then it kind of brought me around to the idea of where we are right now with people talking about, a basic income for every Canadian. Did you have any, do you have any of these thoughts while you were writing the show?
Well, first of all, the character Pilkington, who is the social assistance officer, she knows that he, or at least her interpretation of him, is that he wants more control over her.
Okay.
So that's the price she would have to pay for accepting social assistance. Now, we don't know whether that's real or not. We don't know whether Pilkington is an accurate portrayal of her social worker.
Right.
Because they're fantasizing, right? They're creating a world, but they're creating a world as they see it, as the world in the way that it treats them. So that's where they've gotten these fantasies from. And in this particular case, she's going to reject his social assistance and take over herself. Right?
Yes.
She's going to become God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or is that the moment where she says, the Prime Minister, I'm going to become the Prime Minister?
In that particular case, yes. Yeah, she was going to be the Prime Minister calling Pilkington, civil servant Pilkington, to account. But ultimately, through the whole first part of the play, that she gains power in her fantasies.
Right.
Yeah. You brought up this idea of a basic income, which senior citizens get anyway through our social system. And certainly for artists during the COVID, it began to seem like a good idea, And all those people who said, you got to just go out and get a job and work for a living, couldn't. There
was nowhere to go.
There was nowhere to go. Yeah. It was a very interesting, like they'd set up these various basic income programs. I think maybe Saskatchewan was one of the first ones to try it as an experiment. And of course, you got the Petes of this world saying, well, I don't agree with that. So these people are just bums,
Right.
They cheat the system anyway. So they've divided their world into these almost mythical segments. And that internal anger that somebody is getting something that they don't deserve, whereas they have to work for it. That's such a it seemed to me that I grew up with a sense that there were more people who felt that way than felt sympathy or the willingness to help out people who were in need.
Yeah. Yeah. That kind of brings up like a story that I remember one of my teachers at school, probably in elementary school, telling us about. They like to go racetrack. They like to go like to the racetrack in the States.
Yeah.
And one of their friends at the track one year just wasn't there anymore. And they came back a few years later, and their friend had rejoined them at the track, and they had no way of asking what happened in the meantime, so they finally got to ask. And they found out that their friend had cancer, and they had to like sell their house, all their belongings, because they're in the States. They don't have the healthcare that we have here.
Right.
And then so my teacher said, well, in Canada, we have universal healthcare, and we wouldn't have to do that. Wouldn't you love to have that kind of opportunity? And this friend of theirs goes, absolutely not. I don't want to help. I don't want to pay for anyone else's, problem. I'm happy to pay for mine, even though it felt like they'd given up their whole life.
Yeah.
Simply not to care for somebody else.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. That's just psychology that's certainly there. Yeah. I don't want to take anything from the government.
Interesting.
And I don't want the government to tell me what to do.
And I think about that story a lot, and I see how that, fits into this piece here.
Mm-hmm.
So this show, The Boiler Room Suite, also went on to become an opera, right?
It's true.
How did the show change for you when it became an opera?
Well, working with a composer is interesting because, and I've heard this from other composer writer combinations, but I certainly heard it from my composer, who said, you don't have to have the singer sing about such and such a thing, because the music will express it completely. And then I think, the little voice added to that said, and the music will say it much better.
Oh, geez.
So that's part of the working relationship of a composer and a librettist, But in this case, Quentin Doolittle had asked me if I would work with him to transform this play into an opera. So obviously he was really, the story had captivated him, and he could hear it in musical terms. My main problem working with the composer was that I had from a play that I'd already written and had created the kind of text that it has.
Right, yeah.
Was that I couldn't get the witticisms to fit into the music.
So the script, did you have to change your script? They just weren't singing what was on the page originally. They were changing things, right?
Well, they had to. You couldn't have a long musical passage or an aria or something when the origin of that particular scene was in dialogue, fairly well-paced dialogue, So, and then, since then I've worked with other composers and from scratch, and it was easier because then I got into seeing how you had to have these moments that were stretched out, and you had to have some repetition to carry a theme, a musical theme, through. And I could see reluctantly how sometimes I didn't need to write all those words. that the musical passage would say what I felt was the emotional effect of that particular bit. Yeah.
So some of the maybe in between the lines things, do you feel came through the music?
Yeah, sometimes. But, if you had a line that with two characters who were saying, yes, no, 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 no. Yes, I say yes. No, you shouldn't say that. Well, okay, what do you do with that in music, Do you go, yes, no, I don't think so.
Oh, right.
You see? Yeah.
Right. So finding new ways to get across the same quip, maybe, but now through music and song.
Or you have to eliminate that.
Right. You have to cut it out. After the process was done, sitting down in the audience, how did it feel to watch and take in a new version of something that you had already created?
Oh, I have to say, I love it. Like opera singers are amazing artists, and they've got so many more tools. Really good actors do things that would just amaze you, but they can't do high C's. Or, yeah. So in opera, things are lifted to a degree that have to be achieved in other ways with dramatic scripts.
Mm-hmm.
You have to. They're different forms, and you can finally get some of the power, but it comes from different places.
Absolutely. Okay, I'd love to ask you a little bit about your theology and your vocation to religion. How did you come to realize that you had that calling?
I came to an understanding of faith when I was a teenager, and I came to an understanding of theater when I was a teenager. I went to Stratford in its early form when they were still doing Oedipus Rex. They did that for 2 seasons. And I like that play because has my name in it, right?
Yes, it does.
So it was in the great Stratford tent in that second year. And you walked in and the trumpets did their fanfare, and the lights went down, and then they came up very dimly, and the incense bearers began to come out around the stage, and they were bearing great sort of pans of incense smoking away. It was kind of a brownish, reddish smoke that filled the whole theater. And as it cleared away, you began to see these huge figures with their masks and coming out and beginning the storytelling. And there was something numinous about that, something mysterious that took us into a world that we had not been in. And I felt somehow, as I put these experiences together, that you were on the verge of crossing into a spiritual realm. You know the word liminal, this sort of threshold experience. And so the more I thought about it, the idea of theater was a kind of congregation of people gathered around a story, gathered around words.
Yeah, and that goes back even all the way to the very beginning of theater, thinking about the ancient Greeks and their Dionysus rituals. All of that storytelling goes back to spirituality.
Exactly. A kind of a purification going on, catharsis, right? Through the story, through the telling of tragedy. And the whole part about comedy, and there's lots of comedy in Scripture. The comedy turning us back on ourselves to see who we really are and what we're really about, and how we can. Some of what we're about is laughable, but we can enjoy that. Anyway, so that for me is where the two things came together, and they came together more closely as I went on and began to study theater and theology, and it's still, part of my life. I get hauled in every so often to deliver a sermon. I find myself wanting to look at the story of the scripture reading for the day and cast it in various lights, So the sense of story in faith is still where I'm at. And it takes commitment, and it takes an understanding that you're not going to be able to see things in a unpoetic, practical way, but there will be things like social justice and being kind and being merciful and walking with a sense that things are bigger than you are. So I don't put this over against science or this that kind of thing, but without that dimension of transcendence, our lives, I think, are poorer.
There's a quote of yours that I found in this book that I have, where you say, "I have this kind of naive philosophy that suggests doing things together is the best way."
I think I learned that in Saskatchewan, because the Saskatchewan of the time that I was there, when you've only got like 10 people in the province, it's easy.
Yeah,
it's easy to find a quorum. So that you can.
Well, you also have to rely on each other,
and you have to, yeah. But you can make provincial revolutionary events happen if you've only got 10 people to plan them out.
Yeah. So, what does a master's degree in theater and theology entail? What did you study?
Well, I had attended a workshop in the States one summer when I was studying at McMaster, and in religious theater. And in those days, there was a lot of interest in the ways in which theater came out of religion, like the morality plays and the mystery plays and the Greek plays and so on. And at a Union seminary in New York, they had brought over some of the people who were interested in this from England, and they had a little department, really. And the people who were doing that, they were resource people at this conference, this workshop, summer workshop. And I went back again this following summer, and I asked if I could study at Union. Ministers usually have 2 degrees. They have their arts degree, and then they have something they call an MDiv, a Master of Divinity, which concentrates on being people for the pastoral ministry. And a Master of Sacred Theology, which sounds very impressive.
It does. Even Master of Divinity sounds very... Ooh. What kind of wizarding world are you in? Sounds fun. I want to join.
Whoa, I'll send you out a hat.
Right, thank you.
It's kind of conical and has stars on it. But basically, it's just a degree past the Master of Divinity, the Pastoral Divinity College. In fact, in those days, it was a Bachelor of Divinity. Anyway, but this was a further degree at this spectacular seminary, and it was right in the middle of the Vietnam War period and the protests and the search for social justice, and there were some theologians who had taught there that I admired as well, like Paul Tillich and Niebuhr. And I also had an idea for a play when I started there. I had read a book called "They Sleep in Subways, Don't They?" And it was about a bunch of kind of vagrants who lived in the New York subway system. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Maybe that could be the beginning of a play. And so I think it was actually Sprague and Aggie.
Right.
Yeah. But regardless of that, you asked me what I studied while I was there. I studied... They did have the course in theater, and they created some plays that they staged. The head of the department was a Broadway-type director who also was interested in theology. And for pastors, for preachers, he was their vocal professor. And what he did... he felt that preaching was a physical thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And he had one of his people that he brought in was a dancer, a modern dancer, a New York dancer. Carolyn Bilderbach was her name. And she kind of seduced these uptight theology students into moving their bodies and finding themselves in space and realizing that they were physical beings. So all of that was just on the theater side. On the theology side, I took a course in Revelation and Imagination from Tom Driver. I met my wife-to-be there at Union Seminary. She was taking a couple of courses from Union, and while doing a master's degree in history of religions at Columbia, which is just across the road from Union Seminary. So I had a course in Rita Shelton Deverell.
Yes. Now.
And it can,
yes.
Then and now. And what else? Kind of just general practical courses in design.
Okay.
Yeah.
Design for theater?
Yeah. But other people could take it. It was a visual question. And there was another one in modern architecture, believe it or not.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah. A number of courses that I took were dedicated towards thinking theology in terms of art and vice versa.
Did you have any particular mentors along your path that you want to highlight or tell our listeners about?
Well, from theology, I think Tom Driver was one of my main people. In theater, a number of playwrights have influenced me. People like Beckett, for sure.
I could really feel Beckett in Boiler Room Suite.
Yeah.
Personally.
Yeah, I think the absurdists as well, like Ionesco and so on, at the time captivated us a lot and gave us permission to write freely and less intellectually, maybe, to be able to put ideas together that seem to spark, and we're funny too.
Yeah.
So those were things. There were some writers who were trying to find that kind of way in which ritual works, within the theatrical context, and vice versa. Like, could you make a worship service out of a bunch of sketches? Just in the way that people create worship services out of jazz, like jazz worship and so on, or dance. So I've been, the whole of my life, been in a kind of a dialogue. Like, one of the plays that I wrote for the Globe Theatre was a play. It was at the point where the moral majority was gaining voice in North America. And along with that, the notion that they were opposed to heresy, that they were a very conservative approach to things.
I would say that's where we're still at, very conservative.
Well,
here.
We swing a bit back and forth. I was just about to say that I wrote this play. It was the time of the moral majority, and the people were trying to take control of people's faith in a general way. What could I do about it? Well, I wrote a play about St. Augustine, who was a famous convert to Christian faith, but then became oppressive to anybody he thought was a heretic. And so I wrote this play called Righteousness at the time. So I was saying that part of my work has always had this underlying, or sometimes explicit, relationship to theological issues like that. So the Globe was able to cater to me on. You know how we decided on plays to do?
Yeah, tell me.
We Ken Kramer, who was the artistic director, Ken and Sue, and I would independently draw up lists of topics and themes we wanted to work on. On stage. And then we would bring them together. And if one sparked with Ken, that's the one we would do. And vice versa. Yeah.
Very fun.
Yeah, it was.
On the topic of the theater there, did anything change for you in your writing style when you began writing shows in the round?
Well, it really formed it. The round is much more cinematic in terms of script writing. You just have to find tricky ways to. But if Shakespeare could do it, you can do it.
Yeah, of course.
Because you can, since there's no scenery really much to change, that area that is really the cockpit of Henry V. It can be anything. All you have to do is say, this is what it is. This is a boiler room. This is maybe. Everything happens in the boiler room, so that's not a good example. But
people will suspend their disbelief much easier.
Oh, for sure. It's close to radio drama. It just there's not a lot of stage business to worry about. You can have it in a whole series of different scenes. It's a kind of a flexible. It's a matrix of story.
I like that.
Yeah.
When you're writing, do you consider blocking, or do you just write the story you want to write and then solve the problems afterwards? Do you have a method
of blocking? I
like writing. Yeah,
I write stage directions.
Okay.
But sometimes, like in Boiler Room Suite, I remember getting a letter from some director who couldn't figure out how to make the mountains collapse and the valleys, So finally, I just said, well, if you're really having trouble, maybe you might want to use a lighting or sound. And one of the plays that we toured to high schools, Super Wheel.
Yes.
I hadn't looked at that script for a long time, so I read it this morning.
Yep.
In view of this interview, and it's really funny. A lot of it is.
Yeah. I want to talk about. I think one of my favorite. They're all they're like all scenes, and one of my favorite ones to read was Between the Saints Peter, Paul, and the Speed Demon. That really cracked me up.
Yeah. Some of it is really dated, and if you wanted to do it again, you'd have to update a lot of it, little references.
Just for our listeners, Super Wheel was commissioned by the Transportation Agency of Saskatchewan and the Saskatchewan Government Insurance Office in 1977 to educate and entertain young drivers, and it was performed by the Globe Theatre School Company.
Right.
So they would go. This was a traveling group that. Your wife, Rita, was she part of this kind of ensemble?
Yeah.
Okay.
The first year, they did. They did 3 plays, one for elementary and one for middle school, kind of, and then one for high schools. That was usually a full-length play, and they just performed them in the round in auditoria.
That's so.
Gymnasium.
Well, SGI, I don't think has commissioned any more theater. At least I don't know about it.
Yeah, well, they were having a big drive about traffic safety, and they came to Ken and said, could we commission a play for high schools? And he came to me and said, oh, they want us to do a play about traffic safety. And I said, traffic safety? Really, I'm an artist. I got on my high horse. I said, well, think about it. It's a commission for us. There's some money involved. So overnight I thought about how cars have their own mythology, They mean so many things. I was just talking to someone who said, I was just a little guy and I didn't have, as a teenager, and I didn't have much agency, but until I got a car. And I realized that I could be as powerful as anybody. So that's just one aspect of the mythology of the machine, right?
Well, I know that when I live away from Regina for whatever work or school and I don't have my car, I feel much less powerful and have much less agency over what I'm doing.
You feel naked.
Simply a little bit. I love having my keys on me. When I have my keys, I do feel powerful. I don't know what it is, but yeah.
Okay. So I took the whole history of the automobile, right? From the time they got rid of, from the horseless carriage right through to the drying up of the fuel And now we've got electric cars. I hadn't anticipated that would be the next stage of automobiles. When I wrote this play, I figured that as soon as gasoline was all used up, the cars, we'd have to go back to horses.
No, there's the next thing.
Yeah, this shows how much of a prophet I am.
So this piece, though, was a really big collaboration because you wrote it, and then Jeffrey Ursel was a songwriter, and Rob Bryanton came in to arrange for this. What do you remember of the process of creating this show with those two other writers?
Well, the fact was that at that point, I never had written a song, I'd never written lyrics. I never saw myself as a lyricist. Imagine that I ultimately was able to write libretti for opera. But at that point when I wrote that, and Jeff had a really good facility with lyrics. But he wrote them as kind of folk songs almost he used different modes of music, waltzes and rock and so on. But he wasn't an arranger. But he had worked with Rob before, and then Rob added. Eventually, I started to write lyrics for satirical things.
Okay.
And Rob would arrange them or set them to music. So yeah, I don't write music. So I've always worked with somebody like Jeffrey or Rob. Yeah.
What drew you to writing TYA? Was it because of your work at the Globe, or did you always want to write things for a younger audience?
Well, I don't really see the difference, except that kids will let you know when you've lost them. And audiences will pretend that they got it.
This is, you know what? That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
So when I started to write at the Globe, of course, it was for the youngest audiences. And they would let both me and the actors know. So, you kind of polished your technique by watching how this happened. But I think with kids, you kind of are given a little more free rein to have fun. But you have to be able to do not what I did with my very first play, is just simply assume that anything that you wrote was cute, was good. Yeah.
So I guess this is sort of a question that branches away from your writing a bit, but I'm curious to know, what kinds of stories do you like to seek out and watch and listen to?
That's a good question. It's a good question because I don't know the answer. Or at least I don't know what to tell you, whether it's a secret. I like reading science fiction.
Okay.
But I also like reading really good writing. It's harder work for me to go to the theater. Listen, the best play that I've seen recently has been Marcia Johnson's play called Serving Elizabeth. I was blown over by it because it was so right for this time about it's set in Africa during a visit of Queen Elizabeth before she was queen, when she was still Princess Elizabeth. And it's about somebody who was hired to cater for the royal couple when they came. And then her father, George VI, died sort of at that very point. And Marcia has a character who's like a Canadian young person who's trying to figure out how all of this works, because, what is our relationship with British royalty at this point?
Yeah.
And it has relevance to the truth and reconciliation, as well as African
Definitely.
truth and reconciliation. And I was just blown away with this play. That was kind of restoring my faith in theater.
I just want to ask you one last question.
What's that?
I just want to know, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
The best piece of in any category whatsoever? Actually, I did see something online this morning.
Beautiful. Please share it. Yes.
Okay. It was about not to worry so much about appearances, because appearances don't last. Worry about how to be kind.
I like that.
Yeah. Worry about all the things that do last. Figure that out. What are the are those kind of eternal things that you can't, even if you're not around anymore, even if you're dead, these things do last. But during your own lifetime, in the time that you have to develop, don't worry about the things that are going to disappear.
That's good advice. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Rex Deverell, for sitting down with me for Stage Right. And I just am so thrilled that we got to have this conversation. And I feel you're really generous with me today. So thank you so much.
Oh, you've been persistent and enduring.
On today's podcast, I sat down with playwright Rex Deverell. We discussed Rex shows Super Wheel and the Boiler Room Suite and his time as a playwright in residence here at the Globe Theatre back in the day. Stage Right is brought to you by the Globe Theatre in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada Council for the Arts, my associate producers Tanner Zare and Riley Hardwick, who wrote all of our awesome music, Chris Haynes, our sound engineer, and me, your host, Sierra Haynes. If you want to keep up with our theatre online, find us on Instagram at Globe Theatre Live. And if you want to see what I'm up to, you can always find me online at The Sinking Canoe. Thanks for listening, and please, exit stage right. Until next time.